is the Happy Scientist Podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happyscientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, Ph.D., bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello, this is Kenneth Vogt, and I've got a special guest today. Nick's not with us, but Adam Pawson is. And the reason why you're going to care about Adam Pawson being here is because Adam Pawson is the senior managing editor for Bitesize Bio. So the topic today is how to become senior managing editor for Bitesize Bio. And you might think, wow, that's rather specific. And it kind of is, because I wanted to go down this path of how does somebody get a serious position in science outside of the lab, where they've decided that they're going to do something different, but they want to stay in science. And I know that that's an issue for many of the listeners. If they want to be a happy scientist, they got to get out of the lab. That's just a fact. That's not true for many scientists, obviously, but it is for a substantial portion, and some of them see it as a failure. If I leave the lab, well, then I'm no longer really a scientist. But that's not true. There are many, many career choices out there that are involved with being in science that require someone who's got the scientific background to do what needs to be done. See, there's a reason why I'm not senior managing editor for Bitesize Bio, because I'm not qualified. I'm not a scientist, as I've mentioned many times on the podcast. But Adam Pawson is. So we're gonna take apart how he got here, and what came before this, and hopefully it'll give folks some ideas about what they might do with their own careers, and also give some folks some hope that are feeling like, I don't know if I can keep doing this, and they don't want to end up at Burger King. So we're gonna dig into what Adam has been down the road with. So I was looking at Adam's LinkedIn profile, and there he describes himself as a pharmacologist, biocurator, and bioinformatician, if I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
Now, I know what a pharmacologist is, but those last two were not as obvious to me, so maybe you could define them for us.
Okay, well, I think in my case, actually, biocurator and bioinformatician are pretty much the same thing. And I really need to update my LinkedIn profile. The bioinformatician is there for a reason. It makes my profile sound a bit more exciting. But the reason I chose to include both was because I was job hunting after my previous role at the University of Edinburgh, where I was the senior database curator for an open access expert curated online resource called the Guide to Pharmacology, which captures quantitative pharmacological parameters and information about biological targets and drugs and approved drugs, experimental drugs, and other molecules. And the reason I added bioinformatician in there is because actually, broadly speaking, a bioinformatician uses tools to understand and solve biological problems and help develop, tools. And there's two categories really. The one are the developers, those that are trained in computer languages and coding, which I have absolutely no training in. But then there's another category, which is the curators, people that are responsible for capturing data into, and integrating data into databases. And so that's primarily what I did. Biocuration, which is organizing and standardizing biological data, in my case pharmacological data, so that it's useful for researchers. So I think a lot of people recognize bioinformatician would be those that are trained in coding. So I'm not one of those. So I really should remove that. It was for job hunting, Ken.
Well, it was the bio part that caught me, because I could have been your database guy on that particular gig. That's my background, but but
Yeah.
well, I guess what this is pointing out here, that this type of position that you had, before Bitesize Bio at the University of Edinburgh, that required a PhD scientist. That was and a PhD biologist, not just anything. Um, and that background is what made it possible for you to put together a database and curate a database in such a way that it would benefit researchers, because you'd been there, you'd been at the bench, you knew what they were up against, and you knew what they needed.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So after years of doing that, though, you decided to make the move to Bitesize Bio, which is also kind of a curating kind of position, but it's quite different. So how did you end up at Bitesize Bio, and what exactly are you doing here now?
Okay, well, I mean, probably a bit of context. So there's two managing editors at Bitesize Bio. There's Laura Grassi and me, and together we oversee the running of the whole editorial department at Bitesize Bio, and all the processes involved in generating high quality articles and content and copy that we produce. And so Laura largely oversees the in-house editorial projects, working with writers to create, to produce all the great articles that go on our blog, the how-to and the how it works and the troubleshooting guides and all the tips and that, and lots of fun stuff too, to help researchers do what they do, planning experiments and performing them and analyzing data. And Laura's been with Bitesize Bio since the beginning, I think nearly 15 years or something.
Yeah,
So
she's been around a while.
she's also really great at ensuring that the Bitesize Bio voice gets injected into all the copy and the content that we create. And so that's Laura. Okay, so on my side is I oversee running all the client editorial projects primarily, and so that's serving the companies that come to us with the idea of running a webinar or something like that. And so my role is to serve those clients, and at the same time inspire our community of bioscientists, the people that regularly visit Bitesize Bio. And as we do a huge amount of client work. And so the role there is to help the client target their audience and build their brand and deliver their message, and that includes through webinars, podcasts like this, and application notes and technical articles, and then all the other stuff like newsletters and emails, adverts and social posts, and that. And all that needs content and copy that needs to be generated, and that's what I do together with with the rest of the editorial team and the other departments at Bitesize Bio, like the design team and the projects team that run all the live events. And the challenge there is to distill the client's message and the client's know-how into something that's going to be a benefit to our community, turn it into a how-to, and capturing those benefits and identifying problems that researchers might encounter in the lab, and determining how the client's product or service is going to help them solve those problems, and getting that message across. and then, as I mentioned, with Laura's help, injecting the friendly, bite-sized bio voice into that message to make it engaging and compelling. So that's my my primary role. But I'm also like sort of the main organizer in the editorial department, facilitating processes and putting systems in place to help ensure that everyone in the editorial team has access to the tools and resources they need in order to achieve what they do very well in the most efficient way possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
So many of the things we talk about on this podcast have to do with the, call it the extra science part of many of these careers, where, as you just mentioned, I mean, you have to be more than a manager. You got to be a director. You've got to do more than just the science. It's an important part of the job, and it's a critical thing to the company. We need people who can do that to at Bitesize Bio to get those kind of things done. And if you hadn't already come with some of those skills, um, things would be a lot more difficult. And it's like you mentioned about Laura is familiar with the voice of Bitesize Bio, which is very useful. Laura is also a PhD scientist, and she's familiar with the voice, and that's also a very useful thing. But you bring something additional to the table, which is why we needed you. We needed someone like you, but you were uniquely qualified because you already had management experience and project experience, and these are additional skills beyond your lab skills that matter, that have to be there if you're going to develop your career. So this got me thinking, as I was looking at your resume and the things you've done, and all the way back to university in Cape Town. You're a man of the world. um, did you was this a plan for you? Was this what you were thinking from the beginning of your career? I'm going to end up out of the lab and doing something completely different with my career. Is that how you saw it going?
No, absolutely not. Never. Yeah, I've throughout my research career, I've always, um, editorial work, has always been very attractive to me. The high standards required and processes, and I've always been aware of them. As a research scientist, I mean, I was on a few journal editorial boards. In the latter years of my research work, and I found that really gratifying. It certainly wasn't something that I set out to do when I left school and went to university. But I think when I moved into the biocuration at the database, that then required also a lot of additional writing. Not writing scientific papers, but producing overviews and introductions to the material that was on the database. And so at that point, again, the idea of editorial work came to the fore, and yeah, so I've always been interested in it, but it was certainly not something that I set out to do when I went to university.
Sure. But you did keep an open mind as your career was expanding, and it allowed you to see some opportunities that might not have been obvious earlier.
Oh, absolutely. And um, one of the first things that was highlighted to me when I finished my research career, um, was that there's the science writer opportunity out there, and I briefly explored it, but in the few months between jobs, but it didn't really get any traction there. And then I found the curator job, but it was certainly highlighted that becoming a science writer is an option if you leave research. Yeah.
All right. So that's a question to ask. Do you feel like you left research, or were you going to something else?
It's an interesting, interesting question. The way it all happened, Ken, was I felt like I was booted out of research. That's, yeah, the way things sort of panned out. I mean, we had, I did my postdoc when I finished my PhD in Cape Town. I came over to Edinburgh and did a postdoc with the Medical Research Council, and I was supposed to go back to, to Cape Town after a couple of years, but I managed to figure out a way to stay on and with the MRC, and eventually I was moved after a few years. I was moved on to a career track position as a senior investigator scientist, and eventually I had a couple of PhD students and a postdoc, and the next step was going to be running a lab,
Right.
And then we had what they called a quinquennial review. The MRC conduct these strategic reviews every 5 years for each of their units in the UK, and they shut us down. It was a very long, painful process over a whole year, and most of us were made redundant. A few of the senior scientists were moved into university positions, but yeah, I wasn't one of them. And so yeah, I felt like I was booted out at the time. I was not prepared to start from scratch as a postdoc, junior postdoc again. And there were no positions in Edinburgh or Glasgow or Newcastle that I was particularly interested in any case. And I was settled in the area with my partner, so moving further afield really wasn't an option. So yeah, so that's how it happened.
Okay, well, what one of the things that comes to mind here is that the reason you still had prospects is because you had built them in already. You had kept your interests in broad enough that you weren't so stylized that, look, I got to be in a lab. In fact, I got to be in this lab, and you still could shift and take your career somewhere, because these kind of things happen. Stuff that you don't anticipate and often don't have anything to do with you, they drop in on you, and now your career has now been sidetracked, and you're thinking, where did I go wrong? And you didn't really go wrong anywhere. Um, you, we Time and unforeseen occurrence befall us all, is what Solomon said, and it's so true. But you landed on your feet, though. That's interesting, and well, not just interesting. It's not surprising, honestly. At this point, I've had enough interaction with you that, yeah, I suspect you can pivot if necessary. But I have noticed that from your LinkedIn profile, you still do some publishing yourself, though. So what is why are you doing that, and or maybe why is that important to you?
uh, well, it's not as important as it used to be, and obviously when you're in research, and applying for grants and funding, it's very important to have the publications. But to be honest, most of in fact, all the most recent publications, Ken, are as a result of, my contributions to various projects at the end of my previous role at the Guide to Pharmacology database. So, yeah, unfortunately, those are going to dry up. Well, I say unfortunately. I mean, it's that's just how it is.
How the
Um,
cookie crumbled.
yeah, yeah. I mean, what I really need to do now is start focusing on publishing, articles on the Bitesize Bio blog. I mean, I haven't published a single one yet. I've been with Bitesize Bio for a year, and that needs to change. I just need to make the time. Laura has been very patient with me, and Nick, I'm sure too. So
Well, I will encourage them both to be less patient. Because yes, I think that would be fantastic to see something from you at Bite Size Bio specifically. Um,
yeah,
so this all kind of leads back into something that we had back and forth about a little bit on in email. This notion of imposter syndrome, and it seems to be a big issue for a lot of highly educated people, not just scientists. But I mean, you've been doing this a long time now. You've been, a professional scientist by any definition for at least 20 years. Do you feel like you no longer have to prove that you're competent? Do you feel like you're no longer faking it and somebody's going to call you out?
Uh, well, I guess so. I don't really know. I think I do sometimes still doubt my abilities, and to be honest, I think perhaps that's because I've started a new role. I mean, okay, I'm a year into it, but there's still a lot to learn. So maybe the new transition, which I love, by the way, is does make me doubt my abilities at times. But I think that's probably normal for anyone starting in a new role. But I think the other thing is I've always been a perfectionist. I'm a Virgo. If you believe in that kind of thing, I don't. And and
it's worth mentioning, but I don't believe it for a minute. But it's worth mentioning.
Well, and maybe because you're always you're aiming for perfection, but you're never going to achieve it. So you're setting yourself up for for failure, or being disappointed with yourself. So yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'd never heard of imposter syndrome until I came to Bitesize Bio and listened to a podcast. But it makes a lot of sense.
And for those who would like to hear that podcast, it was called Getting Past Imposter Syndrome. It was episode 10, and we'll have it in the show notes.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is I think that I do feel like I've been very lucky throughout my career. I've had amazing opportunities. It's not that I haven't worked for them, but I have had doors opened, for me, in the few career transitions that I've had, and these opportunities have really presented themselves to me because I've had connections, that have sort of, opened those doors. And, even though I had to apply and prepare and interview for those roles, I had connections there, and there's nothing wrong with that, I guess.
Well, of course. And you're being a bit modest there. You fostered those connections and you earned those connections. It's not just like, well, I just happened to be. It's not like my daddy knew somebody.
Yeah, well said there. That's a good way of looking at it. I'll remember that. Fostering them,
well,
yeah, definitely.
And it points to another episode that I will also be in the show notes. Does humility harm your career? Episode 40. So, and this is something that I have noted about Adam, and we don't interact a whole lot because we don't have a lot of crossover in what we do, but we do interact on occasion. And you do have a modest nature, and it's actually quite valuable in the role that you're taking. You don't you don't jump to things. You don't you don't overreact. You're calm in a storm. You can handle live problems because you don't overtax yourself. You don't push yourself beyond your limits, and you know where your limits are, and that's knowing yourself is a really valuable thing for any career. But in science, I mean, the harm that can be done by people that are not looking at the guards, is tremendous. I mean, and whether it's physical harm or ethical harm, there's a lot of ways where being serious and focused is so critical in having a successful career in bioscience. So, you've been exhibiting that in your entire career, and you definitely do at Bitesize Bio, and it makes you a real foil for for Laura Grassi, because she's a firebrand, and she's dynamic and amazing. In fact, well, I'll have her on in the future too. Y'all get to hear her. But there's a mix there, and then Laura actually was involved in the hiring process for you, because she knew that she had some holes, and you turned out to be the right person to fill those holes, and that's been very good for Bitesize Bio, and I believe very good for the Bitesize Bio community too. It's impacted the quality of the content that's out there.
Yeah, Laura and I work very well together. I think that the differences in our approach to our thinking and that is very well suited to our individual roles. Yeah.
Right. And so the whole upshot of all of this has been, if you are working in the lab and you're thinking, I don't know if this is right for me, or I'm worried that this lab's going to go away, or this grant's going to go away, and I might have to do something different, and is there even a possibility of doing something different? Adam Pawson is a shining example of what can happen when things change, but you still want to stay a scientist. There are possibilities out there. There are opportunities. And granted, this particular job is taken, but there are others. There's other things out there in the world that one can do. And like what you were describing at when you were at the University of Edinburgh, I didn't even know there were such positions. I mean, that's a fascinating thing. And sometimes we just, you don't know until you start looking around, until you start asking questions and talking to other people and saying, what else is out there? What do you know about? And so today we had a chance to find out what one of your brethren knew about and acted on. So, Adam, I thank you so much for coming in today and allowing us to pick your brain and share some highlights from your career that may inspire some other folks to move on with their own careers.
That's great. Thank you, Ken.
All right, thank you. And if you want to see more, Nick's going to tell you more about it in just a moment.
Thank you for listening to the Happy Scientist podcast, helping you to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist. To get more Happy Scientist podcast episodes and all of our downloadables, please go to bitesizebio.com/The Happy Scientist, all one word. And in particular, you might want to spend some time on episodes 1 to 9, where we talk about the foundational principles of human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors, which we refer to in many episodes. You can also hook up with us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Happy Scientist podcast, all one word, to get latest episodes and additional material. We hope to see you there.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of Ph.D. scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.